I'm Elizabeth Castelli. I'm the director of the Barnard Center for Research on Women, and I'm delighted to welcome you to BCRW's first event of the 2021-2022 academic year. We continue to produce our public events in virtual gatherings online, and although we would much prefer to be in person, we're delighted that today's guests can come together from some distance from our campus home to talk together about Adania Shibli's very important novel. I invite you to visit our website to see our comprehensive list of upcoming events. Before I introduce this afternoon's speakers, I want to thank the BCRW staff for all their labors, Avi Cummings and Pam Phillips, and especially Hope Dector and Sophie Kreitzberg, along with student assistant Kayla Legrand, who are all keeping things running smoothly behind the scenes of this program. We are grateful, as always, to our ASL interpreters, Tricia Vasquez and Apollonia Moriarty, and our live captioner, Mirabai Knight, who make our events more accessible. I also want to acknowledge the financial gift that makes this event possible. This afternoon's program is this year's Helen Pond McIntyre Lecture. The lectureship was endowed in 2004 by Barnard alumna Eleanor Thomas Elliott, class of 1948. Ellie was a trustee emerita and longtime friend and champion of BCRW, and she endowed this lectureship in order to honor her friend and classmate, Helen McIntyre. Helen McIntyre served Barnard in an unbroken sequence from her student days as undergraduate president of the college. In 1975, she became president of the Alumni Association and served as a trustee from that time until her death in 2002. This series permanently honors Helen McIntyre's devotion to her college and to education for women. To this afternoon's event, we're truly delighted to welcome to BCRW's virtual stage Adania Shibli, the author of Minor Detail, the remarkable book we are here to honor and discuss this afternoon. Minor Detail was originally written and published in Arabic, but recently translated into English by Elizabeth Jacquet and published here in the US in 2020. It was nominated for a National Book Award for Translated Literature in 2020 and longlisted for the International Booker Prize in 2021. Adania Shibli earned a PhD in Media and Cultural Studies from the University of East London in 2009, and she is the author of 2 other novels in addition to Minor Detail. She is also a playwright and an essayist, and she divides her time between Berlin and Jerusalem. Joining Adania in a discussion of Minor Detail are Layli Longsoldier and Madeline Teen. Layli Longsoldier is the author of Whereas, published by Grey Wolf Press. She's the recipient of a Lannan Literary Fellowship, a Native Arts and Cultures Foundation National Artist Fellowship, and a Whiting Award. She lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Madeline Teen, who will be our moderator today, is the author of 4 books, most recently the novel Do Not Say We Have Nothing, which won the Giller Prize and the Governor General's Literary Award for fiction. Her books have been shortlisted for the Booker Prize, the Women's Prize for Fiction, and the Folio Prize, and translated into more than 25 languages. She teaches literature and writing at the City University of New York. Books by all of this afternoon's guests are available for purchase online from Word Up Community Bookshop, Libreria Comunitaria, BCRW's book-selling partner, Uptown in Washington Heights in Manhattan. You can visit their site at wordupbooks.com. If you don't buy your books from Word Up, please support local independent booksellers when purchasing books. Our format for this afternoon's salon will begin with Madeline setting up the discussion and inviting Adania to read from and speak about her book. She will then be joined in conversation with both Madeline and Layli. We are collecting audience questions in a Google form, a link to which you can find underneath the YouTube video. And I will present as many of these questions as time allows towards the end of the program. Thank you so much for joining us, and please join me in welcoming Adania Shibli, Layli Longsoldier, and Madeline Teen to BCRW's virtual stage.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. I'm Madeline Tien. And as you know, Layli and I have the honor of being in conversation with Adania and with this extraordinary work, Minor Detail. So I'll just make a little correction about the format. We're actually seeing it as a space where we're all in conversation. So there's no real moderator as such, but we're going to try to sort of take turns to sort of make space in different ways. It's, you know, when I first knew we were having this conversation, I really found myself thinking a lot about the trio of us, and the different space that's made possible by three. And so I think the conversation is a bit of a triptych. I'm going to start by moderating. Adania will read. I'll pass the baton to Layli, and we'll see what the space creates. Okay, so for those who haven't read Minor Detail yet, I'll just give a very, very brief opening description. There are two overt narrative presences in the novel. An Israeli commander in the Negev desert in 1949, whose mission is to rid the region of an Arab presence. There is a Palestinian woman in Ramallah in the present day. And there's also a horrific crime of which the Israeli commander is a perpetrator, among others. A girl whose name is never given is taken from the desert by Israeli soldiers after they have murdered her family member or companion. And 4 days after she is taken to their camp, where she is repeatedly raped and gang raped, she's executed. The crime itself is documented and real. Adania, first, it's an honor to be in conversation with both of you. And my questions are actually always for both of you. This is, I think, my fourth or fifth reading of Minor Detail. And each time I read it, I'm surprised by how much more intense it becomes and also how much more particulate. And I wanted to start by asking you, actually both of you in different ways. So 4 years have passed since it was published in Arabic, and I wondered if with the passage of time you understand the novel differently or if you perceive it differently. And Layli, I'm actually wondering the same thing about Whereas, because they're both two landmark works.
You know, I don't want to sound horrible saying that, but I really didn't read the novel. I have written it, but I didn't read it. So when you said you read it 4 or 5 times, I was like, wow, you did something far more courageous than I did. I don't know. My relation to it is almost a non-relation, to be frank. It's I think the writing is the relationship. And spending all these years with it, it took me like 12 years to write it. It's actually since 5 years that it appeared in Arabic. And as if time, the minute one finishes writing is a non-time, is the relation is over, and maybe it also covered maybe with forgetfulness. I cannot, it's almost like it's as vague as before writing it, I would say. I cannot recall things, and maybe I would go back to reading it in 20 years or so, but yeah, it's hard to how to relate to a work one has consumed all the possibilities of writing, and it's impossible to return to it as a reader for me. I don't want that. I don't want this relationship.
Layli, did you want to speak about Whereas, or did you want to add? It's totally up to you.
Well, thank you so much for asking me to contribute in this way. I wasn't expecting to talk about my work at all. But I think with the work in Whereas, I feel like my relationship has changed to it because I have changed. So, I mean, I'm growing, I'm evolving in what's important to me and what interests me and what feeds me. You know, at the time when I wrote Whereas, and I responded to this national apology to Native Americans and so forth, I was at a place where I wanted to really address these big issues, and many of those things were to a community outside of my own. And that was important at the time, because I thought, at the time when I was writing, I thought, if I only have one opportunity to publish something, what do I want it to be? What is important for me to say? And so that's the place that it came from. It also came from a place of being no one. And I think that, I mean, not to say, oh, I'm someone now, but I mean, at the time I was, you know, living out on Navajo Nation, and I was a mom, and writing and teaching, and really, and so, but that was also very, very important to the work. It was as if I had nothing to lose anyway. So that, and I think that created a certain energy and impulse. But these days, I think even emotionally, I have gravitated towards our own community, Lakota community, some of our concerns, our young people, education, emotional and psychological safety. And so a lot of my work is not always for an outside audience, but for us. And so my relation, really in the last 4 years, to continually read the work of Whereas, it has been sometimes really exhausting and tiring, because I'm continually explaining some of the issues and some of the history. And so I'm at a different place, and yeah, that's my relationship to that work now. But thank you for including me. I'm actually so interested in the idea that it took 12 years to write a minor detail, and I love hearing that, because it takes me a long time to write. I give my work a lot of time to sit, and I live in between my writing a lot. And so I would love to hear more about that too at some point.
I, you know, I found, you know, when you were talking, you know, when you were both speaking, I thought about, I mean, Adania, the way you described the relation to the work, as if it inhabited you, you inhabited it. I'm gonna guess that you had to look for how to tell it, and part of what emerged in the novel was both about the act and about the movement towards that history, that present, but the circuitous and difficult and impossible route it took to get to what she sometimes calls the whole truth, the complete truth. I wanted to start, the first question actually is kind of a bit about, is very open-ended. It's about narrative itself, because the book creates its own form in so many ways. And I want to ask you kind of maybe a banal question, but it's that what you think of when I say the word narrative, because it reminds me of what you were saying about, it almost was like the novel, once you had finished writing it, was absorbed back into the air, was absorbed back into the world around it. And narrative, that word, is both a verb and a noun. It's the telling of something and the subject of the telling. It's such a slippery word. So I wondered just if we could start there with narrative itself as it came to be in minor detail.
Yeah, in fact, it started from questioning this term, a narrative, and what kind of narrative there, narrative there in the world, and narrative for those who rely only on words, and as in our case when we write. I mean, Layli was mentioning the idea of explaining. I would say that probably from quite an early age, I discovered I'm a failure in explaining. Like if I want to destroy something, I just explain it because I'm the worst explainer. And this this is almost my entry into writing, the inability to narrate as in a way that you convince others. There's always this kind of almost out of tone, a little bit a mistake, a bit of something not falling correctly. Whereas the idea, you grow up with the idea of a narrative. My mom was a great storyteller, and she would be able to narrate things, and I was fascinated by that. And yeah, Shahrazad, the cliche of Shahrazad, the one who narrates, and through narration she can save her life. And you know that you're not in that kind of group of narrators, of these perfect narrators. So how do you approach the narrative in this case? It's like you're almost gap that you're gonna stumble and fall into, and this brings, okay, what are different possibilities of the non-narrative, the many possibilities that they are not called narrative. And these, I think sometimes there are things that they in terms of also language and words, they grow with us. They grow, and they grow over us, and they take over us. And probably these questions of the narrative and the clarity of the narrative, and the need, maybe in the context of Palestine, to constantly explain and to convince of your pain. It turns really language empty of its ability to narrate, because how can you narrate clearly pain? Or so what then there is that kind of from pain that inspires as a form, as a relation to language. And I think I came to the work with these questions. But I also wanted to make fun of the idea of narrative, because it's not only a failure, but sometimes it's a refusal. And because you see all those who narrate so well, they are creating something that is too much without scars, too much without traces, and I thought it's the easiest, actually. But can you also do it in a way that you are not mocking? Can you do it sincerely, something that you are rejecting? And I think I was really kind of turned with these issues the whole time. That was a relationship in the writing. And I think maybe taking this question so much in minor detail also somehow exhausted it. 12 years of writing. Also, there are 12 years of deleting, 12 years of not writing, of exclusion, of eliminating certain words, of moving parts. And this is fascinating. With while Shahrazad maybe could never return and how she was telling the stories because words are already out, but with writing you can always play, and this is like amazing freedom. And I like this playing, like almost kind of moving the words around and seeing that they can actually move and shift their structure and their relationship to each other. And then this is also a time that you're almost like you're going gushing against the idea of a narrative. That's it. You're broken. It's broken, and that's it. For me, I think now it's not a concern. It's a feeling. It's a ground that one can work from, but it's not more of a question. I would say, yeah, like as if it's not my enemy any longer. It is there, and I don't have a relationship to it as such, the narrative.
Something that strikes me when I listen to you talk about language, a narrative, and I feel it very much in minor detail, is your commitment to language itself. And out of that commitment, and I might even say love, that you hold it to the utmost scrutiny. You're really working out what it's doing, the method of the language in its active state. What is it doing when the sentence is acting like this? What is it doing? And in the two parts of the novel, I know when I interviewed you last year, I called them irreconcilable parts, and I don't know if I believe that anymore, because this time in the reading, the echoes, the recurrences of the words, the continuous threading of the language, even though the two people, my heart, my soul wanted to keep them far apart from each other, these words were seeping across, this world was seeping across. So that's, I think my question is about the scrutiny of language itself, because there's the narrative level and the language level. And I mean, how are you seeing these? Are they the same? Or are you actually pulling one out of the other in some form?
Yeah, I think it's the language is more the one that is leading. And it's leading, and it knows where and how and which form there should be. It's maybe I said this before, but it's a very strange process writing. It's almost your absence, your total absence. This is how I feel it. I'm nothing in the moment of writing. It's very weird, like you disappear. And there is the language that is there, that it's almost alive, not almost, it is alive, and it's inviting each word, inviting another word, and they're building and almost negotiating and distancing themselves from each other. And yes, in this case, of course, it is love to language, because the way it works, it's almost, it doesn't have all the ills of relationships, that it doesn't have these hierarchies and power and deletion, or it's almost this serious tenderness, but at the same time sincerity and playfulness, like all the things that you wish you had as a person, they're in language. And it's yeah, I mean, I love language because I think there's no way not to love it. I don't know how anyone can not love language. I mean, of course, then I'm happy for them, because but for me, it's almost the and language and writing. I think language in writing and in reading is like this an imposing presence that is there for us, that it's not demanding, but it's giving and giving, despite all of our failures somehow. And it is almost this kind of ultimate idea of love that we probably as humans would not be so courageous because of we would be afraid of hurt. But is language afraid of hurt? I think it accepts our mistakes, and this is my feeling. It accepts our. It doesn't disappear. It's not like our mistakes gonna delete it. They can change maybe things, but there's the space for something else. It's almost like smoke. I was telling my son today, like when I was a kid, I used to want to cut the smoke, but the smoke was always going around my fingers. And then he was mentioning a sword of a samurai, and I say even the smoke is so tender, and the sword of a samurai is so sharp and heavy, but the smoke, the sword cannot cut the smoke. It goes around, and I think this language, it goes around our so many things that around us, away from us, and in fascinating ways. It's yeah, but I really don't want to speak about language because I can't stop then.
I have a question that I don't really want to ask, so you can reject it. But I have a feeling that people listening, or people who have been living with the novel, it may be in their mind. When I interviewed you last year, I did not read the newspaper account of the crime, and of the documents that were unearthed, and of I did not read those things, and I did read them this time. And I have to say I was stunned, Adania, at the first part where we see those 4 days in August 1949, how you kept to the record. I mean, you added, you wove the world into a kind of tactile, moment-to-moment unfolding. But when it came to the crime itself and what happened to the girl, were very accurate, and things that I have to admit that I wished were not so, were very much so. So I hesitate to ask this question because as a novelist, I'm not sure I would want it. But the relation with the historical fact. And the article that I read was Haaretz in 2003, I think. So I'm wondering about that relation to the documents, I use real to the real, and to the form that you took to make this, to sear this into us in a way that is very unexpected.
I know this question comes across some, and it's present there. But to be frank, it's not so much for me. Because I don't want to make this relation, but because there are so many things also that they are, form this novel. I mean, of course, there are things that we can identify, and then we see that link. But this work has been written, I would say, by so many words, by so many things, that it's if there's an article or there's a link to it, it's not really an issue. There's probably a link to every word that comes in there, every movement, every particle of dust, a howl, and they are fascinating. That like I was describing before, that you become really nothing in the process of writing, or I become nothing, and it's not like you are denying your presence, but you're allowing the presence of everything else to take over, and everything else in terms of having a form and a language form. As if like suddenly things have their life in words, and there are so many of them. They're immense, and I think in that way, I could trace endless things that they might be really minor, not like the minor that the novel is talking about, but really minor in life, but they become so decisive in the writing that it's overwhelming. And what's the working? Why this happens? This is something, it's almost a mystery as like why we do something. And it's in a level that I think there's no need to rationalize, because it doesn't come from us in our rational way of thinking. And the opposite, it is forming itself. So if that, it's almost like a trick that reference, because it's so clear, but there's so many other things, and they are there. They wrote themselves also. It is, I think it's like who's this character in the first part, how it came to live in the novel around me taking over, and it has its path, and and what's fascinating is this kind of the coincidence in all these things. It's almost, and I think I call it coincidence because really you have no control on the process. I have no control on the process of that, and I think there is the beauty within that. It's almost a life you live without kind of being aware of what's gonna happen. You can guess, but you would only be guessing. You're not living, and this is the thing about writing. I hope I didn't answer your question.
Actually, I feel you did. But I am in complete agreement. And I think it would be wonderful now to have you read if you would like. And then I will pass it to Layli. Was that good? Would you, is now a good time to read?
Yeah, I mean, I think also this question maybe probably Layli would be faced with, and it's interesting how these questions they come, and what they mean, why they are necessary. I think it's yeah. Yes, I would read. I don't like to read, but I would. Okay, so I'm reading the last page in the of the first part. Yeah, there are only two, so yeah. اتجه إلى سريره واستلقى فوقه مادًا يده اليمنى خارج حافته، بحيث لمست أصابعه برودة الهواء الواهنة التي اختبأت تحت السرير في منأى عن حرارة الجو التي أثقلت الغرفة. وكاد يخفو عندما غزت فجأة عينيه المثبتتان بالسقف حركة ما على صدره، فهب من مكانه ونفضها عنه، لكنها لم تكن إلا لأحد أسرار قميصه الذي تحرك أثناء تنفسه. عاد يحدق بالسقف متفقدا بعينيه أجزاءه المختلفة، إلى أن سمع خدش خفيف على أرضية الغرفة دغدغ أذنه اليمنى. اقترب الكلب من كف يده اليمنى المنبسطة في الهواء وأخذ يشمشمها، ثم أطبقها فجأة على فكيه، وراح ارتجاج نباح الكلب المكبوت يتسرب إليها، في حين كان صوت انزلاق أطرافه على الأرضية وهو يحاول الإفلات من قبضته يملأ الفضاء. ويجاهد الكلب، وكلما جاهد أكثر ازدادت وتيرة تعثره فانزلاقه على الأرضية وارتجاج نباحه المكبوت، كما حدة صرير السرير الذي استلقى الضابط فوقه، إلى أن فتح هذا يده أخيرا فانزلق الكلب على الأرض قبل أن ينطلق عواؤه يائسا عاليا وهو يلوذ بالفرار. بقيت يده اليمنى ممدودة خارج حافة السرير بينما اليسرى فوق صدره لا تزال يفوح منها مسحة خفيفة من رائحة الوقود. Thank you.
Hi. I want to start first by saying how honored I am to be here, but also your reading. I feel transported, and I feel even not to understand the language, I am with you, you know, and I appreciate, I mean, it makes me think a bit about being able to speak and to work in our heritage languages, the parts of ourselves, I think, that come into presence that are not otherwise. I'm speaking as someone who works with English, you know, but more recently I'm working with working in Lakota language, and I find I can't explain it, but there's a different self, a different reality that comes onto the page. And so I appreciate that so much. And this is not actually what I wanted to really talk about, but I just am responding to your reading. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna maybe talk about something. I want to welcome both of you, Madeline as well, please, maybe for all of us to share. I wanted to start off by something that we emailed about. This will begin my thoughts. We emailed about before we gathered today, and that was kind of the structure for our conversation. And I noted that I'm not always the best with questions, and it's easier for me to maybe share and listen. And so, but after I sent that, I was really thinking about this idea of questions. And you mentioned earlier, you talked about a little about this idea of questioning. And so I wanted to, maybe all of us, we could share a bit of our relationship to questions and to questioning. Because I started thinking about it yesterday, and I was thinking even culturally. Okay, so I'm a person. I feel like there's two parts of me always working, you know, and in contrast as well. So culturally, and I'm cautious saying this, but because it's not a hard and fast rule, but often in our culture, it's not polite to just go and ask people direct questions, like to go and take information and to take their knowledge. But oftentimes, when we're with people that we respect or we care for or we consider mentors, we just accept what is in just being together and what we receive, how, you know, and we let things be as they are, right? And we often learn the most in those ways. And what I want to say is we learn a kind of sensibility from our mentors, we might say, or people that we respect, and we accept what is, and without sitting and asking and pulling information out of them. I don't know if that makes sense. Now, the other part of me is, I do believe as an artist and as a writer, it is my curiosity that propels me often into my work. And I always say this to my students, it is your curiosity that can really move you forward, especially when we're stuck. What is it you are most curious about? And so we pursue that. But I sense that in the second part of your book, I really was thinking about questions, and that moment when the main character picks up the old woman on the side of the road, and they're in the car together, and she knows this is her opportunity to ask questions about that event in the past, and yet she does not ask. And as a reader, I wanted to scream out, and I thought I wanted to say to her, it's okay. I already see the connections. I already know enough. I know enough. It's okay. You didn't have to ask. But then, of course, she does go back. She does decide to turn around and pursue that. And that's a huge turning point. And it's funny to me that it was sort of on the pins of questions. And I was wondering, I don't know how you guys work with that, how that works in your life.
Yeah, I mean, the minute you started speaking and bringing the question of but which question, as I was saying, oh wow, actually I'm not a person who always asks questions. And then I was relieved when you gradually also were sharing this. Yeah, I mean, we grow up with this, yeah, it's not polite to ask. You need to discover with a sense of sensitivity, with when you are not so visible in the foreground. And I think it's also sometimes not only culturally in terms of the culture, but what the culture and the society undergoes. Because, yeah, there are places that you grow and you shouldn't ask questions. And your way to find the truth is definitely not by asking questions, because asking the questions is almost like bringing about a play ready-made questions. I actually remember in our English class how the teacher was introducing the W as a start of the 4 questions or 5 questions, and we kept the whole kind of time trying to remember what are they, like, you try, because you are not so much, I mean, why does it have to be what, where, how, who, when? I don't know, I cannot until now, like I'm sort of stuck with that. And then you learn that you should kind of ask questions, as if scientifically you should ask questions. And but it is a certain way of connected to efficiency, I point this, I'm posing this question, expecting this answer, because we don't have time to waste, where it is about, almost the capitalism of knowledge and time. Whereas not asking, like, for instance, I have the most annoying questions on earth when somebody meets you, like, so where are you from? Like, I'm from this place where I'm standing on, it's yeah, and then people, okay, like, don't make it so complicated, but why not? I mean, and you have all these kind of, somebody doesn't know you, doesn't know like anything about you in relation to you, and suddenly would like to know the location, which is not the name of a place. It is so many different things. So it's like there is a certain questions that they expect these immediate answers, and all what you want to do the minute they ask you just disappear, vanish. Because it takes a much more time and love and care to approach someone without posing questions. And I wonder when they come, these questions, sometimes, I notice when kids, they ask these nagging questions. They're almost like, every word brings another question to another, that as if they strangle questions. They tell you, questions, we're gonna now demonstrate how terrible it is to ask, and you're gonna suffer at our hands. But there are also other, as you can get close to someone without asking, you also can get close to a question without pronouncing it. I feel that it comes with you. It almost moves your life without it revealing itself. That it's not in this kind of scientific way. It's almost what Macy's describe as the pre-scientific moment, the poetic moment, that things are not about articulation, but about being there and moving, for me, the question of the narrative, for instance, it has accompanied me probably not 12 years, but 42 years. And I could remember the moment when this happens, but it took me so long to articulate it, to reach it, to see it, to see that it is nagging and following. And for me, there are these questions. And there are also some of these more questions that suddenly you live with them. There's actually, I've been working on a novel. I've finished the first draft. The first draft is not, so it's like it will take many years more. But I started working in 2018 and finished in this year. But today or yesterday, and it's related to the question, I thought no, there's something else that I've been hiding from. Another question, which is very strange because it is related. The first moment of the starting, when I started to think that no, it's there, language is taking me there. It is about somebody telling someone, don't ask, do. And it's so amazing that you come with that. So what it is when we stop this kind of moments, what it means when we cannot ask, because a question is not about me wanting to have, but it is an act and you cannot do it. It is it's not just an easy issue, I think. Sorry, maybe I was too long.
Madeline?
I won't add too much. I couldn't help but think of, of something that happened late in my father's life, and I had never asked him about his time in the when he was a child during the war, when his father was killed, was murdered. But I'd always known it, and it's one of those things that you know and you feel, but you don't put words to it because of love. You don't ask the question. But late in his life, I asked him if I could ask. And then I remember I asked him just to tell me about his childhood. Maybe it's true I wanted to be given something, maybe, after so many decades of silence. But I remember he talked for an hour, and I didn't have to ask another question. It was almost like, and then I wondered, why did I not ask before? And I know, and I think we all understand why one doesn't ask. But it makes me think that question is not the question of syntax, of something in the form of a question, the shape of a question that ends with a question mark. It's a state of being. It's a way to let a person know that you have this openness to what might come. And if it's a way to make that space visible, and I guess we do that in the form of questions, though sometimes we use questions in very interrogative, harsher ways. But I do think it's more of a state of mind than a form of language. Yeah, so it's a great thought, Layli. I mean, I think it is hard. I think that's why sometimes I think these conversations are difficult, because part of asking questions, to be the one to ask the questions, is to let the others relax into the space of thinking. It's a way to sort of like paddle the boat in a way, so that they can be, they can simply be in the space and be the eyes to see.
I really appreciate that. I like what you said about asking first. May I ask the question? Like, to ask a question first. I really had never thought of that, and I think that's so beautiful. I may use that myself in the future. And I say that because maybe we all come from certain backgrounds where you talk about your father, and I know I relate to that too. We have parents who have lived through certain things, and we know their experiences are important. What they have seen, what they have, that kind of lived knowledge, if you will. But again, I struggle with that thing of, I also know sometimes they don't talk about things for mental peace, and I respect that too, and so it's always difficult. But it made me think about how do I say this quickly? I wrote a piece that was really about, I wrote a series of pieces about grief, okay? But one of those pieces had an excerpt, or I was using some lines from a conversation between me and another friend in Canada. And we were talking about the boarding school, residential school issue, because they recently, this was a few months ago, they discovered all of those children buried in the residential school.
Hi, sorry. I think that Layli was cut off. I'm going to try to get her back on now. Sorry for the interruption.
Hi, I'm here. I'm sorry about that. right at a really intense moment. Okay. But quickly, I wrote a piece with a few lines of this conversation between a friend and I. And then after I wrote the piece, I emailed it to her to ask how she feels about it, if she's okay with that. I wanted it to honor her and really to honor us as a community. And so she read it, and she said she read that piece to her mother because it was really about her mother, And in that moment, she said when she read the piece, her mother choked up, and it opened a conversation, that a way of talking about it that they had not had before. And so I thought that was so beautiful because, there are these ways, maybe things that we want to discuss, or we want to, especially as writers, to to honor our communities, our people, or our families, but negotiating that territory of questions, or how much to ask, or how much to just accept. Just the fact that, I mean, if I were just to write down, my father does not talk about that time, that's enough in itself, right? It says enough. But I don't know, now I feel like I'm meandering. I got a little sidetracked because I got kicked off, but I wonder if you have anything to share.
Yeah, when as we were speaking about that, I think there is also sometimes there is a need to ask, and we also feel it, the questions of care, as opposed to the question of curiosity. And I think we can feel these different possibilities of questions, like also going back to words, a question can be something when it is uttered or at a certain moment, but it also can have a different life. It's, I mean, we see it in love, how much we get annoyed when our friends don't ask us, or, like they go on. Yeah. And on the other hand, it is what it is for, how does it feel? And I think also this context of probably meetings, that they are framed in Q and A's, and also the context, the academic context, as if knowledge is only perceived through asking. You put your initial research question, and then you find, and it's almost kind of putting one function to the question. And I think now we are asking many things that probably we kind of developing together and bringing together. And I think this is a relation to questions that we have forgotten.
Something that I've been thinking about a lot with minor detail is the absence that makes the presence felt, which is so much underlying the architecture of that second half in particular. There's some lines where she talks about all the changes that constantly reassert the absence of anything Palestinian. And I think it's one of the kind of, I mean, it's a bit of a sleight of hand almost in the novel, in that the thing that she thinks she's pursuing is appearing everywhere around her, in the act of asking, if it comes down to it. Because she asks a question, maybe she thinks she's looking for a different kind of answer, but actually the presences make themselves known in the motion that she moves to try to get to that place. Yeah, it's one of those fascinating things, because it's revealed in a very unexpected way that even the reader may only realize subconsciously what's accumulating in the detail.
Yeah, it's probably she's the one who knows the least, like compared also to the readers. And yes, it is almost like being trapped with all of these things that they are known, but you can never have access to them. It's almost your prison. And she moves, and they move her. And exactly this not being able. I mean, instinctively, she wants to feel the woman, for instance, in the car. but then she remembers her task as if this is the only, it is because of this task as well she's moving in these places, she's falling in these traps, but it is also this desire to go and investigate and ask the questions to get the truth that also at the end is what ends that task completely. Yes, I don't know how to relate to her sometimes, because you want to shake her and tell her, look, open your eyes. But how can you tell her to open her eyes when everything is around her disasters? If she, for a minute she opens her eyes, she wouldn't be able to move. It's exactly because of closing her eyes, almost ignoring everything that she's able to do. That trip is like walking in this landscape of a monster's landscape that but she's walking as an ignorant, serious investigator.
I think that's something that also really spoke to me in the book, because this, like you said, is to open, how you almost want to ask her to open her eyes. But the character herself acknowledges that she's only able to see and interact with so much. I think the line was, and this perception, this awareness that's created to see the, is it the flies shit on the painting, right? So to narrow it down to the smallest, the smallest specks in order to survive. And I think that's so interesting too, because I was thinking about an interview I watched of you online, where you were talking about living life with a kind of literary awareness. And I was really, I thought about that for a whole day or two, to have, because that is what we do as writers. That's who we are. We are artists, we are writers. And so we are living, yet we're attuned. And we're attuned to the moment, to the detail. And we are also very self-aware. And I saw that in the character, and how she was very self-aware. I think there was a line where she talked about even her own fragility, and presenting herself as a self-confident person, but she was quite aware that she was not, and quite aware that she's a person who sees the flies poop on the painting, and her ways of coping with this reality that she lived in. So I had a thought, and now I've lost it, but I wonder if you would like to talk about any of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's with this character, it's like basically really going until the end of the trap of anything, the trap of life, the trap of trying to seek the truth, the trying to articulate it, to hear a sound, to bring a language, words by someone, and I think this character exhausts this possibility, whereas the character in the first one is there, fully present and convinced by what it says. It's really believes what it says, but this character, everything almost she's saying, she's just waiting to contradict it the next step. and as if language also is kind of betraying her and slipping from her tongue, and she only probably sometimes succeeds when she pretend things. But the minute that she's relaxed and she can be who she is and say what she wants, it's impossible situation. It's only through this denial what can be really her is her possibility of existing, of continuing. And I think at the end, because she slips, because she forgets for a minute this game, that she should not follow her own wishes completely, not to forget that she should not follow her wishes, and she sort of fails completely. Yeah, I mean, but now these issues are over. I think now I'm really kind of the question of how transformation happens, and I think it's also present in this book, like, you know, the transformation actually of words, certain words that they are said in the first chapter. I know they are referred to as echoes, but for me they are the same words, how they have a new life, how this word, when it is said in 1949, and when it is said, even a howl of a dog, even that howl of a dog, you know, it's suddenly just the same howl. And then it, in a certain different time, it has a different, complete different meaning. Although it can be in the same thing, we're not like exactly talking about different contexts. It's still almost the same context, but the words, they live differently. So this kind of transformation, what brings this transformation in language, but also in narratives, in us as human beings? What makes a howl, which is beyond also words, beyond language, has a certain meaning, and then a complete different meaning, just by shifting the ear, basically. And yeah. Now I'm off the track.
Well, okay, I'll do that what one should not do and disagree with the author. But I mean, I guess that my question, I think that is a transformative question, how it is a different sound, how it is its own sound in each time. But my ear is the same. My ear, from the beginning of the novel to the end, yes, it's altered, but I can't help but connect that howl and that bark to the other one. I can't help but see that other underlying thread, you know, and I do think that one of the powerful parts about the second half, I think, Adania, I feel like I could be imagining, but I feel like you asked me at one point if I was not like, if I didn't run out of patience with the second narrator, if I, you know, and I think what's so brilliant about the second half is the infrastructure of occupation that shows up so vividly. Because how can she go from this point to that point? How can she try to read 6 maps at the same time? How can she try to see what's been erased from every sign? How can she know which details are adequate, or which details are the one to lead her through? It's like the whole infrastructure of it it wants you to mistrust your own instincts, because what you see and experience and read does not line up. The things do not line up. And that, I think, is sort of the power of that second half. It's that it gets under your skin, that one cannot, like with the fly. I agree that the image of the fly and the way that it recurs, and that what to us looks like this unsteady step, but is the only way actually for her to get from here to here to here. I think that's a kind of brilliance that you've done with the underlying structure, that appears to be one thing on the surface, and yet she's funneled this way. She's funneled that way. It's almost, and what you said at the end about she forgets not to follow her own desire, I think is what makes that ending so shattering. So I, not to disagree with that.
Yeah, no, it's actually, I don't find a disagreement. I think, yeah, it is what you say. But for me, I'm coming from it from a different place. I lived with these words. I didn't read them or hear them. They were leading me, all along. And they wanted to move to that part, and they wanted to look at the other part and say, hello, we're here, but what I want to say, it's not a question of mirroring as much or echoing as much of a transformation, a new life for these words, though they're almost like moving few pages. And this is probably when language is telling you, I'm only language. I can be this there, but now I'm something else. And it's telling us this, because we are also living with this language. One time we hear it this way, and we hear it as a compliment and something fascinating and amazing and opening. And sometimes we are shattered and destroyed, and we cannot, by the same word. Mm-hmm. And I think this is the wonder of language. And it's, again, it's not like about just language games or context. It's almost, how do you say, deterministic movement. They're haunting you. They haunt you, they follow you, they want to strangle you, almost like, yeah, I'm here, I'm coming, but then I'm going there. Because, the disappearance of these places in the first part, their life afterwards is their afterlife. The names of the villages, like the elimination of these spots and this, the empty map that they are looking at it at the beginning, and this empty map. I also, the relationship with maps and the deletion of certain words from that, and the effect of that on. It's not about a relation to reality, but it is a relation to a whole being of how we act, how we can almost like remove just a word, and then what this removal means. And we as writers, we are working with this removal and inclusion the whole time. It's almost madness. You see the danger of that, but also you see the joy of that. And I think with the work, this is like, maybe it is trying to see what a spider or a howl or the heat as words, and the desert, and this really just also as words. And suddenly that when they become almost like ripping the character, almost like an animal eating her and destroying her. Whereas,
Yes, I think we are supposed to go to questions. Is that right? I don't want to. I could go on for hours. I do think
I don't know. After what we said about questions, people feel encouraged to ask any questions.
I think Elizabeth is coming back on, if I understood correctly. So does Elizabeth will have to decide on the questions.
Thank you. So I do think that your very challenging words about questions were taken to heart by many people in the audience, but there are some questions that have come up, but I want to take the privilege of the chair to ask one myself, if I could, if that's all right. And it's addressed primarily to Adania about the question of translation. When you read to us, you made a decision to read in Arabic and not in English, and I was very interested in that decision, and also it made me think about your conversation, the broad conversation about language that is taking place here in this discussion, but about then languages plural and moving from one language world to another. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what sort of process your book went through, how perhaps you collaborated with the translator of the work. What do you think about the whole problematic of translation, of moving from a language world to another? And what does it mean for you to be thinking about your work in these different linguistic domains?
Yeah, I mean, it's like my relation is really to Arabic, and the writing is taking place in Arabic. I should admit I don't have any relationship to any language as I have to Arabic, because there is it's almost the possibility to do any mistakes and to be forgiven, because it's not a relation of an instrumental relationship, and especially in writing, because Arabic, you have the spoken Arabic, and this is almost like a functional way. But the classical Arabic, because it is not so much spoken, it is written, it cuts the language from any practical, instrumental, or functional kind of being. You hear it in the news, you read it, but it has its own life. You almost cannot speak it. You feel ridiculous if you spoke it, as you would feel ridiculous if you wrote the spoken. And I think this makes it a very specific relationship to Arabic, in like what madness you can do within this silence, how much you can play, and how much you can also go with it to places you cannot as a living human being, as somebody who speaks the language. It is only as you write the language, as you write in this language. And I think this also removes my relationship from trying to tell a story, or to be concerned about telling a story, or to explain or inform others. And I wonder, I mean, I'm always kind of trying to see what translations does to that relation. It's obviously it cuts, and it should be cut, because also the minute that what is written gets in a book and it's out there, I don't think there's a relationship, as I was describing at the beginning. But it's even a kind of going further away, and though at the same time, like with the English, and that's the basis for sometimes a collaboration, or maybe, I don't know if translators would call it a collaboration, or maybe they'd call it torture. We need to ask them. But you always feel something that is hovering. And I think the whole time my struggle is all the mistakes and failures that you are allowed within the silence of language, how this is being removed from the translation. Because I think this is it becomes about language, either correct or not correct, where Arabic, the classical Arabic and the spoken Arabic, they allow the possibility that you can do with it. You can, as long as you don't make something grammatically wrong, but you can do whatever. You can change the structure, you can play with it, you can, in the same sentence, use past and present and future, where English is not capable of that. So this is like one step of removal, like, okay, I'm going away, you're going away, this is not. But at the same time, it's an act of generosity, and I so much enjoy when literature is being translated into Arabic, because it opens Arabic. It almost like allows a new interest to Arabic, make Arabic hear another voice, and you can hear it, and it's almost like enriching. And I wonder if translation does this to other languages. It's almost, I feel like with translation, the obsession with correctness, it's almost like you have this migrant who arrived in this place and they should speak without an accent, and they should speak without a mistake. I mean, I wonder this kind of possibility of letting a mistake, an accent, and this kind of full assimilation into correctness of language, how it's possible. I mean, of course, it is allowed for James Joyce and Beckett, but it's not allowed for a translated work. And it's very interesting. It's almost like this migrant person, you need to learn the language correctly, and then once you did it really perfectly, you can do the mistakes. And this is like the kind of the premise. But it's what about to try to see how these mistakes can live and can be extended, and not to think in terms of assimilation. And I think this is sometimes, of course, a struggle for a translator. A translator doesn't want their name to appear on something that is wrong. And I mean, it's amazing to read Faulkner and Faulkner's English and what he does to English, and say, yeah, why Faulkner can do it and why the translator does not allow that. And there are other things, also talking, for instance, about in Arabic, there is something that, Arabic is a very gendered language. So everything has a gender, but there's the form of the two, the dual of a huma. And for me, it's like how this life can be. Or in Korean, or now I know Korean did include or find ways to refer to he or she as a term of other. But how can language work with these possibilities of the two on the margins? I think only through the pandemic we were allowed to have this kind of life again of the two, where also the gender disappears, and it's something that is not so important, and it's not about the I against the other, but how the two mingling. And I think this is fascinating if language can introduce this kind of concept when we, in our practice, in our life, we forget it. Although like the pandemic with the rules of just meeting one person, and I was saying, yes, the dual, the two, the huma is back, and back strongly for a year and a half. But I don't know how language will kind of allow that, or other languages. In Arabic, it's there, it's existing. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that response. We do have a question from an audience member asking about the literary influences on minor detail. And the audience member asks what you think of the Algerian writer Assia Jabbar, if you've read her work, and how you see your narrative project in relationship to hers. And also raising a question about translation, wondering if there's anything untranslatable in your work. And so is there a way in which something is irretrievably lost in the movement from Arabic to another language for your work?
Since we're speaking about translation, I mean, because I always want to make these traps to translators. So whenever I meet a new translator, and I suggest, okay, how are we going to deal with the huma, with the two? And so recently I worked with a translator. So that there's also in the Arabic grammar, there's a certain sounds that defines a relation. So you could say man or ma. It's a kind of a game that only a poet, as opposed to a writer. The poet can do it, but the writer cannot do it, as this is according to the rules of Arabic. So I read the works of this amazing translator, and I emailed her and I said, okay, what we gonna do with this text in this case? It was a question. I didn't ask her to translate or anything, because I was really curious. What can translation do with that? And I think what the fascinating thing that she did was make you actually forget about the question that you were asking. And I think a translation can do it. And it's fascinating when translation does it, because oh yeah, okay, it comes to you from almost like the smoke that we were speaking about, like you want to cut the smoke with scissors, but the smoke goes around the scissors and it's not cut. It kind of diverts your attention and your eyes somewhere else. You go somewhere else. And I think translation can do that. and it's possible to do that. So there's nothing that is untranslatable as much as how you can relate to that and to the main question and where you're going to take that question. It's almost like, yes, I didn't try that, but this is what I thought about. And how translation can work with that. It's crazy. It's too much to ask from translators, especially when they're badly paid. And but when it happens, it's like an opening. As for influences, I'm influenced by everything. Like even when I go to the supermarket and I see like whatever, I'm influenced by that. I cannot decide for which and by whom, and because it's like this greedy child. I like all sweets. I will not give up on any one, and because it also has these so many different lives. But I would say that in addition, I'm a lot influenced by paintings. I think with the novel, with minor detail, I actually found the characters not in any newspaper clip or life or whatever, but from two paintings. And this is the moment actually I decided to write the novel. I mean, there's a hint, and they were like these two paintings, or what is painted and how it's painted. They were like haunting. So, and I think this is not that it's about visual, but it's also about the unsaid, the where language almost is finished. It doesn't have, it cannot go further. So it's there, and I think there I'm more selective. I can see I'm influenced by that. With language, I'm open to everything. I'm influenced by everything. Although I would say that I'm not influenced by Robert Walser, because he's the amazing writer who you read, you fall in love, but you are not influenced by him because he allows you your space and your relation. And I think he does it because he's mad, because or he was defined as mad. Yeah. And for Asya Jabbar, I mean, it's also, she, especially like in her film, Zarda, I think she carries this question of that which is said and not seen, and how she navigates the language, the writing in French language, but the spoken language, her spoken language is Algerian dialect, which is also the dialect of the woman that she was inspired by. So it's almost like, she's writing in the language of the colonizer who oppresses her and these women, but she's finding her liberation in the sound, the unwritten sound of these women in the dialect. But somehow it comes also in her writing. I find her work is fascinating. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your answer to that question. We are at the close of our time, and so I would just like to invite Adania, Layli, and or Madeline to say any last words before we say goodbye. But this has been just a wonderful, wonderful conversation, and I've learned so much from all of you. Do you have any closing words you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I would say just a sincere thank you, Layli and Madeleine and you and everybody who joined us.
Thank you.
I feel the same. Thank you so much. And also I feel so humbled and so grateful to be here with you. So I hope our paths can cross in person one day. Thank you.
Just a thank you.
Okay. Well, gratitude all around to all of you for being with us this afternoon, and to the audience who has gathered from around the world to be here. And it's really it's inspiring to hear from each of you about your work and about how you're thinking about the work, and inviting us to think in more complex ways about language, about memory, about the conditions under which these stories get circulated. So much appreciation to all of you. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing people at our next events, and perhaps also to seeing one another in person again one day. All right. Thank you.